The white van had barely made it 3 blocks from the Harbor View Assisted Living in coastal Massachusetts. 94-year-old Eleanor Johnson, a revered retired Cape Cod principal, was alone inside. Atlas, 130 pounds of giant Great Pyrenees rescue dog, suddenly erupted. He knew she was in danger. He had to go back. Atlas launched himself against the metal barrier. His massive paws slammed against the steel with enough force to shake the van. Susan, his handler and a former social worker, gripped the wheel. This was not the gentle dog she had spent 6 months rehabilitating after he was rescued from a cruel, chained life. This was something primal. Atlas howled again, a desperate sound of alarm. Susan pulled over, heart hammering. The moment she opened the back door, Atlas didn't run for the snowy freedom of Cape Cod. He ran directly back toward the building. He ran straight to room 217. Inside sat Eleanor. She was thin, her expression etched with a profound loneliness that came from a lifetime of being strong, only to be forgotten now. She wore a faded blue cardigan, staring out at the freezing harbor. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. Her family kept their distance. She was dying of the worst kind of illness, a lack of purpose. Atlas stopped dead in the doorway. He moved with a reverence Susan had never seen. He lowered his huge body to the linoleum floor, his dark eyes fixed on Eleanor. Slowly, Eleanor turned her head. Her eyes, still sharp, narrowed slightly. She didn't smile. She didn't reach out. In a voice thin but clear, a voice that once commanded noisy school assemblies, she spoke to Susan. "I don't need the pity of an animal. I taught children for 40 years. I am not a patient who needs therapy. Take him away." She turned back to the window. Atlas did not move. He simply waited. He remained absolutely still, the same forced patience he had learned during 4 years on a chain, as if his years of isolation taught him how to recognize hers. Eleanor's hands, spotted with age, rested in her lap, clutching a tin of shortbread cookies. This was the moment of truth. She kept that tin full, but she never opened it. Atlas waited. The air in the small room grew thick with the silent battle between the former principal's pride and the dog's pure devotion. Susan finally tugged the leash gently. Atlas whined low in his chest, looking back at Eleanor's rigid form 3 times. He moved, but every ounce of his 130 pounds resisted. Susan drove him home that night, frustrated. She feared Atlas's one chance at genuine connection had been immediately rejected by the very person who needed it most. If you think that rejection was the end, you don't know the heart of a rescue dog or the stubbornness of a retired principal. What happened next wasn't about therapy, it was about survival. For the next 5 weeks, the ritual was the same. No matter where Susan started their visit in the Harbor View, Atlas would drag her past residents with waving hands and offer treats. He had eyes only for room 217. He had chosen Eleanor. Eleanor never welcomed him, but she stopped saying, "Take him away." She sat in her chair, holding the tin. Atlas would lie patiently at her feet for 20 minutes. Susan would leave, knowing she had failed the mission to spread joy equally. But then, the staff noticed small changes. Patty O'Connell, the head nurse, a woman who rarely showed emotion, called Susan. "Eleanor is eating full meals now," Patty reported. "She asked us to keep the cookie tin stocked. She even asked for the first time in months what time to expect the dog." Eleanor was beginning to live again. She even called her son Michael, a busy executive in Silicon Valley, not to complain, but to talk about the huge white dog who visited her. Susan felt a surge of hope. This was working. Atlas was healing her in a way medicine never could. Susan scheduled an extra visit that week. On a dark, icy February evening, Susan and Atlas completed their extra visit. Eleanor had fed Atlas his ritual 4 shortbread cookies, a small, silent truce. She had even managed a tiny private smile as her frail fingers stroked his thick fur. They left at 7 p.m. They were 3 blocks away, driving through the narrow, twisting Cape Cod streets when it happened. Atlas erupted. Not a whine, not a bark. A desperate, chilling howl that Susan said felt like a siren inside her bones. Atlas slammed against the barrier repeatedly, his movements frantic and furious. Susan knew instinctively that this was not about a cookie he forgot. She pulled the van over, adrenaline surging. The moment she opened the door, Atlas was gone. He ran, a 130-pound ghost against the falling snow, directly back to the harbor view. Susan sprinted after him, her heart pounding. Atlas hit the main entrance door with a force that made the glass rattle. The night guard jumped back. Atlas shot inside, his massive body skidding on the polished granite floor, and bolted toward the east wing. He burst into room 217. Eleanor was slumped in her rocking chair, her head lolled to one side. Her hands, which usually clutched the cookie tin, had fallen limp. The tin lay on the floor. She wasn't breathing. Susan, a former EMT, reached her seconds later. She pressed 2 fingers to Eleanor's neck. The pulse was there, barely, thready and irregular. Eleanor's lips were taking on a bluish tint. "Call 911!" Susan screamed down the hallway. She eased Eleanor onto the floor. Atlas pressed his warm, massive bulk against Eleanor's side, whining a high, cutting sound of distress. Susan began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. She felt the fragile ribs flexing beneath her hands. How long? How long had Atlas known? The room filled with controlled chaos. Patty O'Connell, paramedics, the rhythmic beep of monitors. Atlas remained exactly where he was, a warm shield, his dark eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. When a paramedic tried to push him away, the gentle dog let out a deep, low growl, the first aggressive sound Susan had ever heard from him. Then Eleanor's fingers twitched. They weakly found Atlas's white fur entangled there. The paramedic backed off. They loaded Eleanor onto the gurney. Atlas followed without being asked, pressing himself against the cart. Susan rushed to the lead paramedic. "He knew! He brought me back! He has to stay with her!" The paramedic, a woman with kind, weary eyes, saw Eleanor's frail hands still clutching the dog's fur. She made a decision that broke every rule. "The dog rides with me up front. He stays out of the way in the emergency room." Atlas had not just saved Eleanor's life, he had just broken all the rules of the human world to do it. Eleanor survived a silent heart attack, but surviving the hospital was one thing. Surviving the regulations of a high-end assisted living facility, that was a battle the old principal had yet to fight. We knew Atlas had to stay, but who breaks the rules of an establishment like the Harbor View? Eleanor spent 4 days in the cardiac ICU. Atlas was permitted brief visits. In the quiet room, surrounded by beeping machines, Eleanor, her voice weak but clear despite the oxygen mask, whispered to the dog who lay his head gently on her bedside. "You came back." It was a statement of profound forgiveness and connection. Her son, Michael, flew in from Silicon Valley, guilt plastered on his face. He saw Atlas. He saw his mother, now animated, talking. He realized he had been replaced, and he was okay with it. He thanked Susan repeatedly. When Eleanor was stable enough for discharge, the question was, where next? Michael wanted her near him in Seattle. Eleanor refused. "I am not finished here yet," she said with the steel that once tamed a cafeteria full of unruly students. She wanted her room, her rocking chair, and her view of the harbor. She wanted Atlas. Richard, the facility director, was a thin, procedural man. He allowed twice-weekly visits, but Atlas could not live there. "Therapy animals are visitors, Susan," he stated firmly, "not residents. Insurance, the health department, other residents will complain about unfair treatment. Susan tried for weeks. Atlas, now obsessed, refused to leave Eleanor's side when the visit ended. He would plant his massive paws and would not budge an inch. The tension slowly built. Then, the inevitable happened. A long-term, wealthy resident named Mr. Harrison, a man who believed in order above all else, submitted a formal, legal complaint to Richard. The animal must be removed immediately, the letter stated. Its permanent presence violates the terms of my residency and constitutes a public health nuisance. Richard called Susan into his office, pale with panic. The complaint is legally sound, Susan. Mr. Harrison's attorney is involved. I have no choice. Atlas has to be retired from the program and removed from the premises by the end of the week. Susan sat in Richard's office, watching Atlas pressed against the glass door of room 217, waiting. She had to fight. She thought of Eleanor, who had found her voice and her joy, only to have it taken away by a complaint form. Susan went straight to Eleanor's room. She explained the situation plainly. The legal threat, the expulsion. Eleanor listened, her eyes closed. When she opened them, the loneliness was gone. In its place was the fire of the old principal, the woman who had navigated school board politics, budget cuts, and countless parent-teacher conferences. The rules, Miss Baker, are only as strong as the people who enforce them, Eleanor said, a faint smile touching her lips. Call a town hall meeting, immediately, and get me my best suit. The facility town hall meeting was held in the common room. Richard stood, nervously reading from the legal brief. Mr. Harrison sat in the front row, arms crossed, looking smug. The other 70-plus residents murmured nervously. Richard announced the decision. Due to legal and health regulations, the facility must regrettably ask Ms. Baker to remove the dog, Atlas, permanently. A wave of disappointment swept the room. Then Eleanor rose. Slowly, with her cane in one hand, Atlas pressing against her side, she walked to the front. She didn't use the microphone. For 40 years I ran a school, Eleanor began, her voice gaining strength with every word. I know about rules. Rules keep us safe. But a good rule, a moral rule, serves the heart. She paused, looking directly at Mr. Harrison. The complaint says Atlas is a nuisance. I say he is a guardian. When I was left alone here, I was dying. Not from heart disease, from the slow, terrible death of irrelevance. Atlas didn't just save me from a heart attack 3 blocks away. He saved me from disappearing while my heart still beat. He looked at me, a person forgotten by the busy world, and he chose me. She pointed her cane at the other residents. How many of you feel that creeping loneliness? That sense that your purpose is gone? Atlas is not a therapy animal. He is proof of our value. He is proof that being chosen, being seen, is the only medicine that truly works. She looked at Richard, the facility director, with a principled, steady gaze. You may send him away, but if you do, you are not saving your facility from a lawsuit. You are guaranteeing that everyone else here will know. When they are truly abandoned, your institution will choose the rule book over their soul. Is that the legacy of the Harbor View? The room was silent. Mr. Harrison looked down at his lap. The moral weight of the principal's speech crushed the legal argument. Richard stammered, then took a deep breath. The facility will make an exception, he said, his voice stronger now. Atlas will stay. He is the facility's first resident companion. The residents erupted in applause. Eleanor, exhausted but victorious, allowed a small, triumphant smile to cross her face. She had fought the system and won. She had found her voice, and she had a reason to wake up tomorrow. Atlas would live with her. Atlas had won his right to stay. Eleanor had won her purpose back. But the biggest challenge still remained: the family. For years, her son Michael had struggled to connect. The final, most important lesson Eleanor ever taught would be her last. The bond deepened. Eleanor began to thrive. She dressed better. She kept fresh flowers in her room. She started talking about her life, her husband, the students she taught, and the challenges of being a female principal in the 1960s. She looked 10 years younger. In the summer, Michael flew in with his 2 teenage children. They were awkward, too busy on their phones to connect with the frail grandmother they barely knew. Eleanor, the seasoned educator, knew the environment was wrong. On their last afternoon, Eleanor asked Patty to gather everyone, her family, Susan, and a few of her closer resident friends in the common room. Eleanor, standing at the head of the room with Atlas at her side, addressed the gathering. "Today," she announced, her voice strong, "I am teaching my last lesson." Michael, her son, looked confused. His daughter, too, looked up from her phone. Eleanor spoke not about math or history, but about love and legacy. She looked at her son, Michael. "Michael, I was a good principal. I taught thousands of children, but I was never very good at being a mother. I was too tough, too dedicated to the work." Michael's eyes welled up. He went to interrupt, but Eleanor held up her hand, the classic principal's gesture. "I taught you to be independent, but I failed to teach you that it's okay to need someone," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I failed to show you how much I loved you. The distance, the silence, that was on me too." She looked down at Atlas, whose head was now resting on her lap. "When Atlas came back for me, he taught me a simple truth. You can be broken and still be worthy of devotion. He chose me without condition. And that choice gave me the courage to choose you again." She put her hand on her son's shoulder. "I want you to know, Michael, that Atlas found me when I was dying of loneliness. But you built a beautiful family. I am fiercely proud of the man you became. You are my greatest success." Michael, an executive who hadn't cried since childhood, collapsed into his mother's arms. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." The family hugged. Atlas nudged his head into the group, a massive, white, silent participant in the reconciliation. It was the perfect, public, heartfelt culmination of Eleanor's life as a teacher, a mother, and a survivor. She had redeemed her life's greatest failure. When Michael and the grandchildren left that evening, Eleanor was tired but lighter than air. She had done it. She had tied up the last loose end. She had taught her last, best lesson. Eleanor's purpose was complete. Her final year was a masterpiece of redemption. But even the best stories must end. The coming weeks were quiet, gentle, and utterly beautiful. But the true power of this story, the moment that saves the lives of dozens of others, was yet to come. The October days grew shorter. Eleanor grew quieter. She sat in her rocking chair with Atlas, watching the red and gold maple leaves outside her window, talking less about the past and more about the simple beauty of the present. She looked at Patty, the head nurse, one morning. "I'm ready, Patty," she said, gently stroking Atlas's ears. "I've lived a good life. Atlas gave me a reason to stay for a while, and now I have peace. Just promise me one thing. When it happens, he must be here, right here, in this chair, by the window." Patty, tears running down her face, promised. That night, Eleanor asked the nurse to open the curtain so she could see the stars. She asked the nurse to leave the bed rail down. Atlas waited until the nurse left. Then carefully, something he never did, he jumped onto the hospital bed. He curled himself against Eleanor's side, his massive body taking up half the narrow mattress. Eleanor wrapped her thin arm around him, buried her face in his white fur, and whispered words no one else would ever hear. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for making me matter again." She fell asleep that way, his steady heartbeat a quiet counterpoint to her own struggling rhythm. Sometime in the deep hours of the night, between one breath and the next, Eleanor Johnson's heart simply stopped. There was no drama, no alarm, just a quiet, peaceful stepping away. Atlas felt it immediately. He lifted his head and made a low, mournful sound that woke the night nurse down the hall. Susan and Patty arrived at dawn. They found Eleanor peaceful, one arm still draped over the giant white dog. They sat on the bed beside her, crying, holding vigil, honoring this woman who had been forgotten until a huge dog decided she mattered. After the funeral, held in the Harbor View Chapel, packed with all the residents Eleanor had touched, her ashes were scattered under the large maple tree where she had sat with her son. For 3 days, Atlas would not leave Eleanor's bed. He refused to eat. The staff worried he would die of grief. But on the 4th day, Atlas stood up. He ate his food. He left the room. He did not go to Susan. He did not go to the kitchen. He started a new routine. He began patrolling the facility, not randomly, but with the same quiet, single-minded determination he had shown when he chose Eleanor. He went to Harold in room 109, a veteran who hadn't spoken since his wife died. Atlas pushed open the door, settled beside Harold's wheelchair, and waited. Harold ignored him for 2 days. On the 3rd, he reached down and touched the fur. Within a month, Harold was leading a veterans discussion group. Atlas moved on to Patricia in room 324, who spent her days playing solitary card games, abandoned by her children. Atlas rested his head on her lap while she played. She began talking to him about her regrets. She started calling her children first. One by one, Atlas found the forgotten ones. He became not a therapy dog, but the guardian of the Harbor View. He would spend weeks or months with a person, staying until they remembered how to engage with life again, until they felt chosen, until they had found their reason to wake up. He was the final greatest lesson Eleanor had ever taught, that purpose does not end with retirement, it multiplies with devotion. Over the next 7 years, Atlas connected deeply with 43 different people, 43 individuals who had been sitting alone, waiting for death, but instead found a reason to keep living because a giant dog, once chained and forgotten, refused to leave their side. When Atlas finally grew too old, the staff wheeled him to the window overlooking the maple tree. His final days were filled with visits from the elderly men and women he had saved. They brought him treats. They petted his graying muzzle. They thanked him for choosing them when no one else had. He died on a snowy January morning, 7 years to the day after he first chose Eleanor. They buried his ashes under the maple tree, right next to Eleanor's, with a simple stone marker that read, "Atlas, who taught us that love does not divide, it multiplies." The residents talk about him still. They tell new arrivals about the white dog who saved the lonely ones. They tell them that sometimes the most broken among us are exactly the ones meant to heal each other. They tell them that being loved by even one soul completely is enough to make a life worth living, right up until the very last breath. If you were moved by Atlas's incredible dedication and the power of finding purpose late in life, please hit the like button and share this story. It reminds us all that we are never truly alone. And click here to watch our next video, another incredible true story about a bond that defied all odds. Let us know in the comments below, what animal saved you?